Hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Keely Wilson. I am the Technology Channel Marketing Manager on behalf of G4S Secure Solutions. A very warm welcome to you all this morning, and thank you for joining us in the third of our continued professional development sessions. Today, we're going to be focusing on access control, and we'll be exploring how you can use access control to deliver proactive and intelligent security. So thank you for your time and your investment. We appreciate you taking the next hour out of your very busy day and taking the time to join us. So we've got an informative and engaging session lined up for you today, and we've assembled a panel of experts this morning who are going to speak at different intervals throughout the next hour. If you've got a question, please feel free to use the chat function, which should be on your screen, and you can ask questions throughout the next hour, and there'll be time at the end of the session where we'll assemble the panel back together and we'll address those questions that you've asked throughout the course of the session. So I'm going to introduce you to today's panel, and hopefully you can see them all on your screens, and I'm going to ask them to give you a quick wave as I introduce them over the next couple of minutes. So firstly, we have Noah Price, who is our Academy International Director, and the Academy are actually sponsoring today's session. The Academy play a pivotal role in our continued professional development program, and on behalf of G4S, Noah will be speaking shortly on access control and how it can be used within a broader and wider security program. So welcome, Noah. We've also got Steve Gibson with us today, who's the head of system design here at G4S Secure Solutions. Steve will be looking at design and compliance and considerations for access control from a holistic perspective. And later on, Steve will be joined by his colleague, Matthew Welsh, and he'll be helping field any questions around the design process. So welcome to you, Steve, and we'll welcome Matt onto the call later on.
Thank you.
Morning, Dave. So we've got David Quinn with us this morning, who's the product manager for G4S Fire and Security. So Dave will be focusing on product management and the methodology, ensuring the right commercial and technical solutions are achieved, and how we navigate the myriad of suppliers, vendors, and products in the market, just to ensure that people like yourselves and security professionals are given the confidence that there's a robust infrastructure behind the products and behind the services. So morning, thank you for joining us today, Dave. And finally, and certainly not least, we've got Mark Williams joining us this morning from AMAG Technologies. Mark is the sales director for the EMEA region, and Mark will be focusing on looking at traditional access control products and highlighting their features and their benefits, as well as looking at the latest innovative technologies and products that are out there on the market, and certainly any that have become prevalent since the start of the pandemic. So a warm welcome to you, Mark, and thank you so much to our panelists today for your time and for speaking. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Noah, who's our first panelist. And Noah, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Keely. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. So my name is Noah Price. I'm the Academy International Director. So first of all, what is the Academy? The Academy is a specialist learning and development platform that is an international platform across our entire business. It's a customer-facing platform and also an internally facing platform for the delivery of specialist training, design, and the delivery of integrated security solutions using our risk-based approach. And I'll come on to that in a second. We support our individuals and also our customers by creating value in order to become their trusted partner. The backbone of the Academy is its specialists, and you'll be hearing from specialists today in this session. And our specialists are specialists in particular products or a category of products, or in particular sectors, or all of the above. So as I said, you'll be hearing from those specialists today. So the risk-based approach then. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see security effects listed, starting off with deterrence. Now, deterrence is the panacea of all the effects. If we can deter threat action from taking place, we've achieved our aim. But of course, if the threat actors do succeed in acting, then we need to carry out and resource all of those other effects, from control of access, detection of nefarious activity, assessment of what we've just detected, the delay of the nefarious activity, the response to that activity, and then communicating with our response force, and then finally the recording of all of the events for audit and training purposes. The products that you're going to hear about today, in fact, touch and contribute to all of those effects. In fact, it's quite rare to have a product category that actually contributes to all of those security effects. The risk-based approach is simply 3 questions. What are we trying to protect? The assets, people, property, information, or reputation, and working out the criticality of loss of those asset types. You know, the denial of access to those assets, the destruction, the damage or theft of those product types or asset types. Sorry, and then we need to work out what the threat is. What are we trying to protect those assets from, and the level of intention and the level of capability of those threat actors. Obviously, we can't affect the capability of threat actors, but we can certainly affect the intentions of their actions. And this comes back to deterrence. If we can deter by deterring their intentions to act, then we can achieve that panacea first objective of deterrence. And then finally, once we've worked out the answers to those 2 questions, then we can decide how best to protect our assets by implementing security, integrated security solutions. And so you're going to hear today about the design and then further the different types of products that we can bring to bear to achieve access control and how they actually contribute to all of those security effects. So I'm now going to hand over to Stephen, who will talk to you about the design considerations.
Thanks, Noah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Gibson, Head of Design at G4S. I've been within the industry and with G4S for 19 years now. So as part of today's session, I'm going to cover off some of the considerations needed when designing an access control system, the standards and compliance that covers it, and the different levels of system that we can come across within the industry. Our objectives whenever we're completing a design, again, it's communicating with the client so we can provide the best solution for their needs, and considering the health and safety requirements and associated maintenance risks around the design, providing the compliant solution against the latest standards, and being able to select the right equipment for the application. And again, value engineering and offering the systems that meet the objectives while staying within budget. And the main aim is delivering on our objectives safely and providing value through the right solution and our partnership approach, not just based on cost. So how do we achieve our objectives? Again, working closely with Noah's team as he's discussed the risk analysis and what takes place before it comes to the account management team, who will then tie in with the system design team, and we'll take the client's brief and turn that into the design and solution that they need by touching base with our product support team, our strategic partnerships, and our technical support team within house. The standards that form part of the access control we need to consider then is BSEN 60839 Part 11 or -11 Part 1 and 2. Part 1 will cover the functionality, performance, and testing methods of all access control systems, and Part 2 will be covering the planning, installation, commissioning, and maintenance practices. CDM, again, with any design, is a big part that we need to consider, and that comes down to where we're placing door controllers and how we're fitting locks in a safe manner. NCP 109 is the NSI Code of Practice. Again, it covers the design, installation, and maintenance of access control systems, and we have 3 further standards when it comes to lock-in solutions, which we will cover on a later slide. As part of the NCP 109 and the NSI requirements, a full specification is required for each system, and that's enables us to detail the door location, the reader type, the lock type, the access point classification level, and whether the lock will feel safe. The picture on screen is an example of what we provide as part of our design to meet the standards. When it comes to access point classification, there are 4 different classes when it comes to access control and securing doors. We have class 1, which is low risk, and this could mean you could secure the door with maybe a pin only, and it would sort of apply to scenarios where it's potentially a stationary cupboard, low risk. Class 2 would be a low to medium high risk, and that could be gaining access through that door via a valid card swipe. And again, we could use those on cleaner stores or maintenance rooms. Class 3 would be medium to high risk, and a scenario would be a valid card swipe plus PIN. And the main areas we would use those would be comms rooms or main entrances. Then we have the high risk category, which would be more of the biometric reader and more used in prisons and high security facilities. So our design approach when it comes to selecting the correct system, there are many systems on the market, and our main focus is working alongside the product team to identify a solution to fit the needs of the application. And some of the key considerations we need to know before we start the design is the integration capabilities, the operational requirements, the purpose of the proposed system and what the client wants to achieve, the customer's budget, the environment in which the grade of equipment is going to be used, whether we're selecting the right lock for external use and we're using the correct reader, the size of the system, the management, and any IT requirements that may be required. And once we understand the requirements, each system will have a performance level, and we can categorize these to entry level, professional, or enterprise. The performance level will have an impact on cost and functionality, and some of the requirements again to consider is the system going to be standalone or integrated with another system? Are the integrations going to be software or hardware level? The number of doors and users the system's going to be running, the number of client workstations, badge making facilities, whether it's a single or multiple site, the need for future expansion, and whether there's certain features such as anti-passback or global anti-passback. Some examples of where we use entry level, again, where there's no requirement for a server, it would be a standalone system and no requirement for integration, and generally systems up to 20 doors. A professional level system, again, no real need for a server, but there may be some low level integration through hardwired or outputs. Some additional features such as badge making, anti-passback, and maybe a requirement of between 20 and 100 doors. When we get to the enterprise level, it will be a head-end server. There will be multiple software integrations such as lift, destination, dispatch control, and generally over 100 access control doors, and maybe some multiple sites on different locations, which just gives us a better scope for across the state. When we start to build a system and when it comes to the design, again, once we've established the category and the product we're going to use, we start to build the system up. And we start this through 3 different channels. It would be basic coverage, which would consist of external entrances and high risk rooms, maybe barriers. Medium coverage on a system could be the same as above. All your entrances would be covered, high risk rooms, and then the potential for lift lobbies and tenant office space, which would restrict the movement down. High coverage would include all of the above for basic and medium coverage, but we could then start thinking of lift, destination, and individual offices for restricted access. And again, there's no right or wrong way to approach a design, but however, using this methodical approach lets us capture the customer's requirements and gives us a mechanism to work within the budget. Once the doors have been identified that require access control, we will then select the equipment. And again, this is driven through a specification, and it will be detailing the reader type, egress type, and locking requirements. So when it comes to locking requirements, a brief overview of some of the standards that we need to adhere to, which is in line with the construction product regulations. Fire doors should be compliant with BS-EN 1634-1, and this means any door that is a fire door should be fitted with a compliant lock, such as an EL560, and the fire door must maintain its integrity with the lock fitted. Emergency escape doors, again, should be in line with BS-EN 179, and this means any door forming part of an escape route where people are familiar with the escape strategy is required to have a single point of activation. And again, this could be with an EL560 complete with a handle or push pad, where it's one activation through the door. It's not hitting the button and then having to do the handle. Panic escape doors should be under BS-EN 1125. And again, this means any door forming part of an escape route where people are unfamiliar with the escape strategy. It's required to have a single point of activation. And again, this could be complete with a panic bar. And some scenarios where those would be used, so emergency escape doors where you're familiar would be around your office or place of work. And again, when you're using panic escape doors under BS-EN 1125 with the panic bar, it would be more in line with cinemas and shopping centres. Again, Maglocks are still a firm favourite when it comes to access control. They can still be used, but they need to be used in the correct scenario. And again, if we are using them, we just need to make sure that they're on the right doors. And once the system's complete and designed, we will follow that up with a full CAD package of our complete design for sign-off, along with the NI specification, and that will be issued to the customer and the team to deliver. So thanks for your time. I will now pass you across to Dave Quinn, Product Manager. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, a lot of things to consider there when designing the system. And I guess what my main part of my job is to decide and manage which products we use and which people we work with to achieve those requirements, because you know, there's a lot of things to consider, and there's a lot of people in our marketplace. One of the really nice things about our industry, it moves on a pace, but it does mean there's a lot of new products that come to the table. There's a lot of people who claim to be the best at ABC, and my job is filtering those out so that the things that end up in our portfolio and are available to Stephen and his team are fit for purpose. We can get support on them, etc., etc. It possibly worth mentioning that we are traditionally and by design not early adopters of the latest and greatest new things. We do things at scale and at speed sometimes, so we need to be very aware of that fact. And, you know, if we do something well, we do it well in lots of places very quickly. If we get something wrong, we do it wrong in lots of places very quickly. So getting it right at the beginning is integral and a really key part of my job. To achieve that, it really is all about having really good relationships with our supply chain. So we're not just contacting them when we want to purchase something for the next project. We are dealing with these people constantly. We have a relationship. I personally will visit our tier 1 suppliers at least once every 12 months at their premises, and they will come and visit me at least once in our offices. It's quite often more than that, and we're chatting at exhibitions and things like that as well. But it really pays dividends. We get to know about new products. We get to know the good and the bad about them. And, you know, in recent times, it has paid dividends. Everybody on this call has probably had some challenges with supply chain on lots of things. We've probably had, or we have had, a lot of assistance from our supply chain and cooperation. So we've managed to, we have suffered from it, but not as badly as some other people. It's not just the products themselves and, you know, how securely you can secure a door, etc., etc. There are those other items that are on the screen now that are a really critical consideration. So technically it might be the best thing, but if we can't get support for that product, and by support, I typically mean If it's a highly technical product, telephone support, 24 hours a day if required. With simpler things, maybe not 24 hours a day, but we need somebody, doesn't have to be in the UK, but it's a big tick if it is, where we can turn to if we need resolution quickly. Our engineering force are very highly trained, so by the time we're reaching out for external support, we're beyond the turn it off and back on situation. And our suppliers know that and will treat the calls accordingly, and that does pay benefits. Stephen mentioned a few standards and compliance with those standards, and there are a lot of them out there. There are some particular requirements for CPNI, which are very, very high secure solutions. We do operate in that market. Quite often it's the same vendors that have a non-CPNI version of it. Personally, I get a bit of comfort if somebody's playing in the CPNI world. Their more standard product is bound to be benefiting from all those good things in the background. I did mention we're not early adopters of technology. Worth mentioning, we are definitely early adopters of standards. Stephen mentioned the N179 and 1125, which is around escaping from your building. So, you know, we're talking about access control, but this isn't access control in its own right, but it's an example where access control touches a lot of the building. So when you need to get out of that building, you need to be able to do it properly, and you need products that comply with those standards. We were some of the first in the industry to adhere to these standards and require our clients to either take our recommendations or, as Stephen mentioned, sign a waiver to say they'd risk assess their own building. After all, it's not our building, it's your building. If you're happy that other management systems means you don't necessarily need that level of compliance, then we're quite happy, obviously, to proceed with what we do. We run a tiered system for our suppliers. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of slides' time. One thing worth thinking about, especially if you're introducing access control into a building, your first thought is, well, I've got a load of doors. I want to keep people out and let the right people in. But quite often, and increasingly, and Stephen mentioned integrated systems, you are integrating to other applications that will help with your access control, but also help with management of other systems. And there could be dozens of examples on there, but there's a few on there that you can see. So visitor management. So these four things are a feature of Symmetry. Other manufacturers have similar offerings to varying degrees. So visitor management interfaces with your access control. That means people sitting at their desk can invite visitors without having to visit a security officer to do anything. The visitor will or can receive a credential on their phone or something they can print out, turn up to reception, log in, and then the person they're visiting will know they're there and go and greet them. Or it could go a bit further. It could let them through the first door so they could get to the person they're for the meeting with. Connect in Symmetry is a module that allows you to connect, strangely enough, to other third-party systems like HR, so you can pull information. If you have a leaver, the fact they're flagged as a leaver on your HR system will take away their access control rights without anybody having to touch it. So that can be quite useful. And identity management is another module where you could have some other systems for, you know, identifying certainly that the person turning up is the person that you're expecting, and that can also link in your access control, and if there's any doubt, electronically block them from the system. So just making the point that if you're thinking about access control, speak to whoever's advising you on you, do a bit of research. You might be able to get lots of benefit from it in lots of places, and I know Mark's going to touch on that a bit in his presentation. That's a very simple diagram just showing how things sit together. Traditionally, the client will supply a network. We can, if required, provide networks for our own use on client sites where they don't have that ability. And typically these things are talking over the client's IP network and passing information back and forth. Typically, if you require it with little human intervention, so it's taking a few more people, taking away a bit more human error, and just giving you benefits outside of locking and opening doors. That diagram is a good representation of the tier system I talked about. So we have some tier 1 vendors who, the best way to describe it, if we've got a greenfield site and no restriction on what we can use because there's no legacy, so the client's not demanding anything, they've come to us with a problem and we're just providing the solution for it. We have a suite of products which will be our tier 1 products, and as you can see on the screen there, I won't go through them all the good stuff that has to go on in the background to qualify as a tier 1 product. Sometimes clients will already have an existing system X, and if they want to make it bigger, they need the same equipment, they need the same vendor. So we have a comprehensive list of what we call tier 2. So we still have those relationships because we need them, but it isn't necessarily a product we would take to a new client if there was no no demand and we could deliver a tier 1. And clients, vendors can move between depending on where the market's going and what we're doing, but it remains pretty static. We're very managed about how people get to be where they are, and we get that bit right at the beginning, so there's generally not a need to be moving between it. Of course, we have something called tier 3. The marketplace, the verticals are vast, so we quite often come across things that we don't have a relationship or not something we use. Doesn't mean we won't, but each time we have that, there's a proper business case that if we take this new product, process, technology on, can we be confident that we can get support for it? Commercially, we can get to it. Sort of all the good stuff that requires you to be a tier 1 or tier 2, but it'll be on an ad hoc relationship. It's no good getting something because a client wants it and then finding out we can't get support for it, etc., etc. So a bit of a summary there on the product management process. I will now, just stressing it's all about partnership all the way through, true two-way partnership, and I think we do it well. I will now hand you over to Mark, who's going to talk about some developments in access control. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I'm Mark Williams, as it says, Director of Sales for EMEA at AMAG Technology. For those of you who don't know, we're actually the technology arm of G4S, and therefore by extension Allied Universal, our parent company. So we design, develop and manufacture security management solutions. Just to paint the picture for you, in this section, we're going to take a look at physically what a typical access control system looks like. And then I'm going to pick up on 4 global trends that we've seen in the global access control market. So these are buzzwords and phrases you're probably familiar with, but the detail behind them may not be quite so widely understood. So we're going to take a look at frictionless operation. We're going to take a look at cloud-based solutions. We're going to delve into big data, and we're going to have a look at unified solutions. So I'm just painting the picture for what we're going to do. Both Stephen and Dave have really dug down into the weeds on all the various standards that go towards assembling a system and how that needs to be done. One of the things that is often overlooked in the design of security systems is what type of door controller do I use? And a lot of manufacturers spend a lot of time deciding how many doors should a door controller support. And AMAG has actually gone beyond anybody else in the industry and actually has a complete range of everything from a 1-door controller to, believe it or not, a 20-door controller. And you might say, well, why would you do that? There's a very simple reason for that. By design, you should never have more capacity than you actually need in your system. Typical example, if you've got a car park barrier that you want to put access control on, if you had to put an 8-door controller in there because that's all you had at your disposal, you'd have 7 doors of unused capacity. So you want to use a 1-door controller for that. The polar extreme is if you've got entry turnstiles into a high-rise facility, you might have 4 in lanes and 4 out lanes. There you'd actually want to use an 8-door controller with a single IP connection rather than 8 1-door controllers and 8 IP connections and all the associated switch capacity that's needed. So by design, with this type of solution, you should never have capacity in the system you don't need. Some other important considerations, these systems don't operate in isolation, so there's often requirements to integrate and handle both audio and video. Stephen, I know, talked about standards earlier on. This type of solution is both CPNI enhanced, accredited, and is also UL listed and CE certified. But one other important consideration is the system is also open. And that's a phrase you'll probably hear a lot about, but what does that really mean? Well, it means that the system is designed to interact with other systems in a simple and prescribed manner. So there are API SDKs that you can utilize that allow bidirectional data exchange. But further than that, there are commitments to standards such as Play, which is an interoperability platform that allows, for example, this Symmetry security management system and a Lenel OnGuard system to exchange cardholder enrollment information so that you can be simultaneously enrolled in both systems. So that's a full commitment to open standards. And indeed, the latest generation panels themselves have a published open API, which means they can both talk to a Symmetry system and a third-party system at the same time in a completely prescribed manner. So that's what a traditional system looks like. I'm going to turn now to one of the 4 global trends that you may be hearing about and dig a little deeper into it. And we're going to talk about frictionless operation here. So I can tell you that pre-COVID, 85% of all of the access control readers that we have been shipping globally were Bluetooth Low Energy or BLE enabled. Now, did that mean that everybody had given up using cards and were using mobile phones as access credentials? No. What we generally saw is people were buying the future enablement of phone technology for access control. And so that was a trend that we saw at the time. But post-COVID, we've seen 2 very distinct trends. One is the move towards virtual credentials. So that's where your credential is actually on your phone with what we call a frictionless push to the phone itself, which means in some of those integrated scenarios Dave just talked about with an identity management or a visitor or an identity management system and a HR integration, information can be pushed out using one key data feed called an email address, and you can actually send an email to somebody and invite them to have a virtual credential with a QR code. They can then take a selfie on their own phone, and once that's been approved in a central location, that becomes a live credential with a photo ID in the phone. We also have the ability to incorporate what we call fit to work questionnaires. So have you got a cold or have you got a fever? Do you have a continuous cough? If you answer yes to any of these before you present your card to a reader, it can invalidate the reader or the credential, I should say, over the airwaves. It also offers you the ability to use the biometric of the phone for 2-factor authentication. So if you're, as most smartphones do, support fingerprint or facial recognition, you can actually use that biometric before the phone will transmit its unique number to the reader. So we've moved to virtual credentialing. One thing that we've also seen post-COVID is a complete move away from touch biometrics. Nobody wants to put their finger on a sensor or put their hand on a sensor that hundreds of other people have just done the same thing to. That absolutely has pretty much died. So what people are doing now is moving towards frictionless biometric, using either facial or wave type technology. The reader that you see there has the ability to even incorporate temperature checks and optional mask detection. And these are extremely reliable biometric devices with, as you see, false exception rates exceeding 1 in 10 billion. The second big trend that lots of people will have heard about is cloud-based. Cloud-based everything now we hear about. Well, what does that really mean in terms of access control solutions? Well, ultimately, the decision to be either cloud-based or what we call on-premise all boils down to who is going to provide and maintain the server-based architecture that your system needs. You can't get away with one unless you're in the very small system solutions that Stephen was talking about earlier, where you've got a no server at all and it's a standalone solution. But if you're into the medium to large system, you're going to need a server. And in a hosted solution, that's invariably going to be something from either Amazon or Microsoft with AWS or Azure, who will provide that infrastructure for you. The end user will then pay for that hosting service, and that will be a monthly stroke annual fee. And what you end up with is endpoint devices on site and data in the cloud. I'm just going to leave that last part of the description hang for a bit. Data in the cloud. That does cause some organizations, particularly those that traverse more than one country, some issues, because we've now got personnel data in the cloud, and that has certain GDPR implications, and there is, in some instances, a flat-out ban in certain countries on having any externally hosted personnel data. Your on-premise solution is your typical solution. So that's where the end user owns the infrastructure for the servers. Then you have servers, clients, endpoints, and data on site. You tend to use what's then called perpetual licenses with no annual fee. So you buy the software up front, but the maintenance of those servers is the requirement of the end user stroke provider integrator. And we have solutions that fit into either of those two pockets. One thing I would say is we have seen a trend, particularly in the US, who are generally early adopters, of those that move to hosted solutions, moving back to on-premise. And the reason given in many of these instances, they've underestimated the cost of the hosting fees from the likes of Amazon and Microsoft. So just bear that in mind. We all hear about big data. We've also probably heard about things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. What does that mean for access control? You know, we've got a history of people being familiar with machine learning or AI for video. But what about access control? What's been done there? Well, the first thing we can say is that access control systems are tremendous repositories of big data. Every time you swipe a card, we sort of use the term swipe, present a card, or now present your phone or your biometric credential to a reader, you create data. So access control systems are actually tremendous repositories of big data. But until now, very little has ever been done to actually analyze that data. So we've been plowing forward with this and actually developed our own adaptive algorithm for security systems that learns what normal behavior is. So, for example, the system will learn that I'm an early riser. I tend to come into building 2 in Tewkesbury. I go in through a particular door, generally before 7 o'clock. I then go upstairs, grab a coffee, come back down into my office. It will learn that. So if all of a sudden I start coming in at 5 o'clock in the morning and going into a different building and accessing areas that I may well be able to access, including maybe the data center, that's unusual. When you marry that with data that can come from your identity management system, that can provide you a risk profile for an individual, and in my instance as a director of the business, I have access to financial data, I have access to corporate plans in development and future technology, I will have a high risk profile in the organization. So if I start behaving abnormally, there might be a perfectly good reason for that, but wouldn't it be good to know? Wouldn't it be good to get an insight into potentially nefarious activity? And that's what this technology does. It does exactly that. The clever things are that it's adaptive. So if your environment is changing, it will gradually pick that change up. We have churn in access control, offices get reconfigured. The system will actually even pick up on that. The other clever thing is the technology is agnostic to the database that it pulls its data from. As long as it knows where to find data such as person name, location, time, the system will actually work with any database. So it's a very, very powerful tool. And this is giving you actionable intelligence into that potential nefarious behavior. One of the other clever things that it can do is, we've all heard about how easy it is to clone certain cards, particularly older 125 kilohertz procs. You can go on eBay and buy a $10 device that will do that for you. And yet, more than 50% of global access control systems are apparently still using that old technology. How would you ever detect clone card operation? The electronics of the system can't do it because the card is exactly the same card. So if I'm allowed in one building and or one location and another location, then if those cards are presented within a small time window of each other, an access control system will just let both transactions go through. But our system will say, hang on, it's not possible for Mark Williams to be in 2 places at the same time. That's abnormal, can't happen. So it can even give you cloned card detection capability. And we've also extended this type of technology to provide effectively early warning of people that have come into contact with certain individuals. So there are extensions to the system that can provide a pre-warning for somebody that may have been in close proximity with someone that has COVID, for example. So that's also available. So lots of clever things on big data. The final trend I want to take a look at is what we call unified solutions. Now, before we talk about unified solutions, let's just take a step back. In the 80s and 90s, everybody talked about integrated solutions, integrated systems. And what you see in front of the guard there is an integrated system. It's got access control, it's got video, it's got graphics. But look how many screens there are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can count at least 5 screens. So imagine there's an incident now in the top left-hand pane of the top left monitor there in front of that guard. How do you think she's going to respond to that? So whilst the 80s and 90s was all about making systems interoperable and integratable, what we've ended up with now is complexity. And so what the concept of a unified solution is intended to do is to get to the nirvana of what we call single pane of glass operation. So that's presenting that operator with a single screen that covers not only the access control systems that we've been talking about this morning, but also video management, fire alarms, building management, also IT and network monitoring. Why? Why would we do this? Well, several reasons. One, to make the guard more efficient and make them able to respond more quickly. But secondly, the extension of that is that you don't need as many guards to actually run the system. So there are potentially big OpEx savings behind that. And you're actually going to drive efficiencies through the unified solution. So it's actually become very on point and very on trend to try and mandate this single pane of glass unified solution. Okay, so hopefully I've given you some thought as to emerging trends. I'm now going to hand you back to Keely.
Thanks very much, Mark. Lovely. Thank you to all our presenters and taking the time to share their expertise. We do have some time for the Q&A session as promised, and thank you to everybody who has submitted questions. There's quite a few that's come through, so I'm just going to dive straight in if that's okay. If all presenters could join me back on the screen, that would be great. Apologies, I think we had some interference there. The first question that's come through, Steve, this is for you. As you were talking around maglocks earlier, a question had come in and asked if you could talk around the holding force of maglocks to prevent unauthorized access.
Yeah, no problem. So there's various different locks on the market, and they all come with different holding forces, which range from £650 right up to over £2,000. But again, it comes down to the scenario of which you want to use the lock, and for basically traffic control for the access control system, a smaller lock force would be fine. But getting to more of the high security stuff, you want to be using more of the likes of the Abroy lock fitted actually at the center of the door rather than the top with the Maglock. So again, it depends on the application, and again, the integrity of the door. I mean, there's no point in fitting a super secure lock onto a door that may not be able to take the force of someone trying to break through that door.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that, Steve. And another question that's come in, I think, Mark, this is going to be directed at you as you were covering Symmetry earlier. Somebody asked, does Symmetry have an AD integration?
It does. It actually has two types of Active Directory integration. So the first one is a simple, what we call AD SSO, or Active Directory Single Sign-On. So that, as it says, provides a single point of enrollment, so the same username and password you use for any AD connected system can log you into Symmetry. The second strand, which is a bit more involved, is called AD Active Sync, and that again, these names were brought about by engineers, not marketing people. So AD Active Sync kind of does exactly what it says. So that actually provides you a synchronization of the permissions and data within Active Directory and applies them to Symmetry. So there are two separate and distinct modules, single sign-on and AD Active Sync.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that, Mark. And another one for yourself, Mark. Actually, your session was quite popular with the questions. Somebody had asked, you were talking around capacity in access control systems, and somebody had asked, is it not useful to actually have spare capacity in a traditional access system to allow for any possible changes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. And the examples I gave were fairly extreme ones. And so given that we make such a variety of panels, 1 door, 2 door, 4 door, 8 door, all the way up to 20 doors, yes, it's often good practice to have some spare capacity, and we would advocate for that. The example I gave was an extreme one where some manufacturers make only high capacity controllers or low capacity controllers, and so yes, it's good practice. The extreme examples I gave were to highlight that you can design out unwanted capacity.
Thank you. And Dave, I'm hoping you can tackle this one. Somebody has asked if you can elaborate a little further on access control systems outside of the building, specifically in car park management, or regarding speeding in car parks, and any products and services available there. Sorry, Dave, bit of interference there on your microphone. No, it's a little bit interfering. What I may do is, Dave, I may ask Mark to pick that up. There seems to be a bit of interference on your side. Thank you. Mark, would you mind picking that question up for us, please?
Crackling, I forgot what the question was. Something about external access control now. Could you just repeat it?
Yeah, so it was talking about, so we've covered quite a lot of access control products in and around buildings, but somebody's asked if you could just elaborate on some of the products and services around car park management access control, so ANPR, or managing speeding in car parks,
yeah, I mean,
etc.
things like LPR and automated bollards, rising bollards, and adherence to things like PAS 68 for vehicle ball mitigation are all things that need to be considered. A perimeter fence is your first line of defense around a facility as well. So it all goes back to NOAA's risk-based approach. So LPR can be fully integrated into systems. Speed, operation and integration, less familiar with the way that would potentially integrate into this type solution, but obviously if there are systems that can provide outputs in a prescribed format, they can be looked at. But I think the holistic approach has to start from the outside in as well, using NOAA's approach of understanding what the risks are before defining the appropriate stance. But all things like fencing, perimeter intrusion systems, external CCTV cameras, intercoms with audio and video, and rising bollards, gates, all need to be considered.
A lot for consideration there. Thank you. Appreciate you picking that one up, Mark. Steve, just going back to Maglocks, there's been a question that's come through. I'm hoping you can pick this one up. Somebody's asked, how often does the Maglock need to be maintained, so cleaned and serviced, in order to keep it at its full holding strength?
Yeah, so generally the maintenance of the access control system is once a year. But again, usually what we'll find on site, they've got maintenance officers, and again, it's a check that they would potentially do. Obviously, it depends on traffic through the door and how often it's used. It sometimes could come loose, but again, once a year should be fine. Excellent,
thank you. Mark, I do have another. I've got quite a few actually. They seem to come thick and fast for yourself. Somebody's asked what encryption standard is used on the access control cards for Symmetry, and does this present any risks with card cloning or tailgating?
Really good question. Thank you, whoever asked that. So we have our own DesFire-based encryption, and it's a private key encryption, which means the keys are held by AMAG for security reasons. So the cards are secure and the keys are held by us.
And how often are Symmetry systems updated? So end users suggest improvements on operational level and how they can be implemented, but how often should the Symmetry system be updated?
Well, really good question again. So we generally work on one major release of software annually. So we've just had a major release 9.4 in the spring, and prior to that 9.3 was about 12 months prior to it. So there's generally one major release a year. There are interim fixes. Anybody that tells you their systems don't have bugs within them is kidding themselves. So every piece of software has bugs. Look after Microsoft updates Windows. So we will fix any problems as we go along and then roll all those up. So if somebody has a software maintenance agreement with us, They've got access to free software upgrades all the time. We roll up all those changes into the major release that comes out once a year. We would recommend, like with any IT system, that software maintenance agreements are taken out with the provider. That gives you access to free software upgrades as and when you need them.
Excellent. And just earlier on in your presentation, Mark, when you were talking around the cloud infrastructure and the US trend of moving from cloud back onto premise due to the hosting fees, somebody asked, is it possible to provide the source of that? They'd be interesting to read, and we can send that on follow-up comms if there's some information around that.
The source is AMAG. So these were AMAG customers that actually put Symmetry in the cloud and then decided to take it back out of the cloud and go on-prem. I will have to look into whether we can disclose who they were. I know who they were, but I need to see whether or not we can actually make that information public. What I might try and do is see what we can provide in terms of typical sorts of costs to host a solution. That might help people make their minds up, but at the moment I'm not prepared to disclose who the customers were.
Understandable, thank you. Okay, so I've got one question I'm hoping Dave can answer. We may just need to test your microphone. If not, Noah, I'm hoping you could pick this up. Somebody's asked, are G4S doing further work to be able to support Symmetry over the cloud as a CPNI approved system? So also, can Symmetry be used as a CPNI approved system using wireless? So for example, mobile phones as the credential, or is this being looked at? Oh, apologies, Dave, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know the exact answer, and I wouldn't want to say without speaking with Dave, who is the SME on this. Dave, we can't hear you. If you message me in the chat, I can read out the answer.
Yeah, or what we could do, there's quite a few questions that have actually come through that we've not had time to address. There's been, actually, as the panel Q&A has been moving forward, we've had more and more questions. So it certainly sparked quite a big discussion around Symmetry. So what we will probably do is follow up after this session on the follow-up communications. We will probably look to answer all the remaining questions. I wouldn't like to leave anybody out, but we are running out of time. So thank you to everybody who has asked questions, those that we have addressed and those that we haven't. We will absolutely make sure that we do in the next 48 hours and be able to provide answers. I'd like to thank the design team, Steve and Dave, for sharing their product expertise today, Noah for championing the CPD program, and Mark for being the SME for the access control portfolio. There's quite a few questions that headed your way today, Mark, so thank you for that. So we are just coming up to the hour, so I am going to start to close up the session. Hopefully we've taken you through how access control can be used to deliver proactive and intelligent security, and that it shouldn't be looked at in isolation. The design and the compliance considerations we've also covered today, and also, traditional access control systems and what's new in the industry. So hopefully we've covered all those learning outcomes for you over the past hour. So there's just a few next steps before we leave the call today. So there's a whole host of security material on our Academy website, and we're going to issue a follow-up communication email where you can join the Academy if you've not already done so, and you'll have access to a whole suite of papers, thought leadership articles, webinars on threat-related topics for anybody in the industry who will find it useful. So details will be on that email. And we'll also issue an access control guide, which will cover end-to-end what our panel have discussed today, and also some more information on access control as a holistic program for you. So quite a few questions in terms of how you can request your certificate of attendance. I'd like to thank you for attending our session, and I do hope that you found it useful. if you would like your certificate of attendance so that you can claim your CPD points, we will be sending out a follow-up communication after the session. It'll be with you in the next 48 hours. There will be a link in the email where you can request your certificate and send your name and your email address, and we'll send your certificate to you within 7 days after you've submitted your details. So thank you once again for your time today. I hope you found it useful. I'd like to thank our presenters once again and our panelists for giving up their time. I'm hoping you all have a great day. Thank you for joining us, and we will be hosting another session in August, which we'll put details on shortly. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, everybody.
And big thanks to you, Keely, and to Paula working behind the scenes for a very interactive and informative session. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah.